Well, welcome to the Third Man Podcast. I'm here with Tyler Vela and Colton from the last video. Tyler, tell everybody about yourself, where to find you, and all that fun stuff.
So I'm Tyler Vela. So I'm the host of the Freed Thinker podcast and Freed Thinker YouTube channel, dealing with the YouTube channel dealing primarily with apologetics, with unbelievers and atheists and new atheists and all that kind of fun stuff, skepticism about the Christian faith. And the podcast is dedicated more to these in-house discussions dealing with Christian theology. Not always in-house. Some of the topics are with heretical views and things like that, but some of these kind of more inner theological views having to do with the Christian faith, not so much dealing with apologetics and evangelism to unbelievers. So that's the purpose of the podcast and YouTube and blog.
Colton, do the same thing. Tell us about yourself.
Yeah, so I'm Colton Carlson, and I've been on Tyler's show, The Free Thinker, a couple times, which I was honored to be on there. And we did the last part, right?
Yeah.
Responding to this video. So I teach philosophy and math in Arizona, and I'm on Soteriology 101. I've talked to a lot of provisionists about this, and I'm friends with Drew on Facebook. So I know where he's coming from. He's wrong, obviously, but I know where he's coming from. Same thing with Warren. So I'm excited to be here, and hopefully the next coming months I'll be on Tyler's show, maybe, hopefully more.
Yeah, I think with your book review of Stratton coming out, I've asked you to do some audio versions, and we can have you come on the show and talk about those. Dealing with Molinism some more.
That should be done by the beginning of August, hopefully.
Although I gotta say I'm not sure how much more content you can put into. Hey, stop begging the question of incompatibilism.
I mean, there's a lot, but I mean, pretty much the vast majority of my response is that. But I'm only a third done, and I'll only finish that third by beginning of August, and it's just on definitions. So I think that's crucial in this debate, and as we'll see in this video, definitions are crucial, right, Tyler?
Yeah, it's true. You're already such an academic, because I think when I first started talking to you, you're like, oh, I'm like 3/4 done, and it's like 150 pages, and now you're like, I'm a third done. And it's 180 pages, and it's just on definition. So really, it's like it's volume 1 of like a 5-volume.
Yeah, it's just like I keep telling people it just keeps going and going. And obviously, I don't have an editor. I'm trying to do it myself. I'm not looking to publish it. It's just kind of for fun for me. But yeah, I'll probably take some things out, maybe keep some things. I don't know. We'll just see how it goes.
You can fix it and self-edit and self-publish. I mean, my book, I shouldn't say first book, the only book that I published, started out the exact same way. It started out, with the new atheist David McAfee, and it was literally like, oh, I'm just gonna write like a normal length book review of his book, and then I was like, this is getting a little long, and then I was like, oh, I'm at like 150 pages. And I'm like halfway done, and finally I was like, oh, this is actually like a book length book review where I've addressed every topic, and so it's self-published that way. So you might get there.
We'll see.
Cool.
All right, gentlemen. Gonna do some screen stuff now. So let me share
DJ Bonson.
Okay, we're going live. All right, did you see the pretty gentleman?
Should I see something?
You should click me.
If you hover over Vincent there, and then just click on watch stream, yeah.
I do all this
and
fancy
I'll
stuff.
Pull up the video.
Fancy. You mean the basic Discord?
Yes. I am old, Bonson. I am old. Technology scares me.
You have a podcast. You follow it much more complicated than what I'm doing right now.
I have the most literal, like, I still don't know how to stream things. I literally, I just record it and save the file and upload it and add some music, and that's about it.
Oh my goodness, dude. That's exactly what. Well, I have Chase check things out.
Yeah, I don't have a Chase.
You need a Chase, but you need an efficient Chase.
Yeah, well, he's a good kid. He's a good lad.
So, this is right where we left off. Do you want to start there? Do you want me to go back? Any recommendations?
I mean, I don't know how much I watched through. This is probably about honestly where I stopped, because I when it first came out, I originally watched it, and I think I made it to about. I don't even think I made it to an hour. I think I made it to about 40 minutes, and I was like, I'm done.
I lasted longer than you.
You might have. Yeah, I mean, I think so.
At like an hour and 20 because it was just too bad. But
yeah, I mean, There were so many, and you all covered them. Actually, there was a bunch of places where I would be like, stop, say something about this, stop. You all, you guys missed some point. No, you for the sake, I'm sure, of the episode, you let it go and only hit on certain things. But there were so many areas where there's very confused language on what we even mean when we're talking about compatibilism and incompatibilism and determinism. And, Colton, I think you had pointed out that they seem to have this kind of myopic idea that determinism is this quantitative thing, that all determinism is the same as long as the same number of things are determined, rather than they're qualitatively different types of determinism where we're talking about different ways that things can be determined.
This is just I don't honestly remember if I said it during the previous video, but this is by like totally more than what am I trying to say here? The objection that we usually get as compatibilists is that you're exactly right. Determinism is determinism, and the how doesn't really matter. That's begging the question, because for compatibilists, the how absolutely matters.
Right.
It's the way you are determined matters, and it's just something that incompatibilists, specifically these two, visionists in general, latent flowers, count them in, just cannot, life of them, wrap their head around. It's so infuriating.
Yeah. So I think going into, because this is all now going to be off the cuff for me, because I don't think I've seen any of this.
Okay.
So going in, I think just saying that part from the beginning. So when I say, hey, they're begging the question again, people know exactly what we're talking about. I don't have to re-say it over again. The other part, and I think there's, I've finished I'm almost finished with your guys' response to it. I think there's like 10 minutes left, and I don't know if you get to it. They had just started kind of really getting into their view of open theism, and dynamic omniscience and all that kind of stuff. And one of the areas where I don't know if you all discussed it or pressed on it, but they try to say, well, God knows the future. In this, he knows. He goes through all like those 7 categories of like different ways that you can know things, and well, God knows the future because he knows all the possibilities. And Bonson, you had pointed out very rightly that, well, they say weird things like on their view, God can be creative, and you're like, well, no, they can't. If God knows all possibilities, he knows all possible kinds of butterflies. Like, he's not inventing a new type of butterfly that he had never thought of before. So there's some of that, but I think where I would push, and I don't know if you all got to it, but where I would push is just I don't exactly, in 2 ways, I don't know what they mean, right? Because when I say I know what the probabilities are, right? Knowing the probabilities of various different outcomes is not the same thing as knowing the outcome, right? So in saying God knows the future because he knows all the probabilities about the future, right? Those are 2 different things. So it's somewhat of a kind of slippery, little bit of a, I don't want to say deceptive because I don't know if it's intentional, but it's just really misleading to say, well, on their view, God does know the future because he knows the probabilities. Well, no, I mean, knowing the probabilities about something is not the same thing as knowing something.
Molinists like to don't exactly press the same rejoinder, but it's very similar. Like how to the grounding objection. Well, we know things all the time. Like, you know that if you go to work or something, then you turn right, like you would turn right and this would happen, but it's still just probabilities, right? At the end of the day, it's probabilistic measure. It has nothing to do with actually knowing what will happen at that time in this specific way in the future.
Yeah, it's like saying, I mean, imagine I was I somehow knew all the different combinations of numbers in the lottery. That's like saying that it is, as long as I knew all of the lottery combinations, I therefore knew the outcome of the lottery.
Yeah.
Right? No, I don't. Like those are just two fundamentally different things. And what kind of bothered me, frankly, and I'm pretty blunt with open theists. I have no problem saying that their understanding of God is basically like a mega Zeus. What somewhat bothered me is they listed off all these things. Well, on classical theism, and again, Bonson rightly pointed out, it doesn't have to be on classical theism, but on a full, a classical understanding of omniscience, they were like, well, God can't have these categories. He can't have this knowledge of probabilities and of what could be and all that kind of stuff. Which, on one hand, I want to say, well, that's not true, because I have no problem understanding that God knows what could be. He just knows that it's contingent upon if he had decreed it. Right? So he just knows it could have been somewhere else if he had decreed that it was different. So he could have that type of knowledge. But if they mean it in the kind of non-decretal, as they call it, the decretal theology, if he means it not that way, and he really does mean it as God doesn't know the outcome, he just knows the probabilities, in the same way that, and because they compared this, they said in the same way that we can know probabilities. I would just point out, well, we have that type of knowledge of probabilities and not outcome because we're limited, right? I mean, that's a deficiency in our knowledge, that we have to have that type of knowledge. That's not a virtue. And so they ascribe to God this, like, as if not having knowledge of the future, so that way he can have all of these other kinds of unsureness and uncertainty, as if that's a virtue of their view. And I want to be like, what you've said isn't it really, really great that God is limited like us fallen humanity? I just can't follow them down that path.
Well, it's a virtue that life's, like, for God, is also like a big guessing game. That's to bring a lot of people comfort. But he does it at a bigger level. So you're just like, you're a small fry, but God's just like he's up there. He has a much more complex calculating system.
Right. I mean, it would be somewhat like saying, like defending that God, Yahweh and Ashtoreth really were married because otherwise, like, you would have an omnipotent and omniscient God who doesn't have the experience of copulating and having sex. Like, that's literally the type of argument, is like, well, isn't a God that experiences and has the same proclivities and everything, isn't that a good thing? And I want to be like, well, no, like, in some ways it's not a good thing. Just listing off things that we can do that God can't do in virtue of him being God and us being us, it doesn't. That's not a demonstration that it would be good if he could do those things.
Right.
I would say it's the opposite on considering Isaiah. Exact opposite, actually. God should be way creature-creator distinction needs to be completely made in order for him to remain God. Otherwise, it is literally a golden calf. We are making God, we are making, like, he is more of our creation rather than we are of his.
Yeah.
And that's not a theology I want to get at behind. I never found that objection to be cool. I do want to say two things. I don't know when we want to start, but looking at the title, I didn't watch the whole thing. I watched about an hour and 20, 30-ish minutes. Let's just look at the title of I noticed it before, but I don't know if I said it in the previous video. It says, by the way, theological determinism is false. Realize in the whole video, as far as I can tell, it's the hour and 20 minutes that I listened to, there was no talk of proving theological determinism as false.
No.
Yeah, and this is one thing, no, that's a great criticism, and this is a problem with like almost all his videos. Like Warren agrees.
Hey.
It's like there's like 95% irrelevant to the title. It's like almost clickbaity. Like there's one on like I don't know, it's something else, and determinism's evil. The generic title name, go, and then you watch the video and like, there's portions to it mainly dedicated to like how substitutionary atonement, it's just a weird Q&A where things are flowing. And there's it's actually him telling us what his position is, what a dynamic open theism.
Maybe he wants his subscribers to go up a little bit. Maybe you should subscribe, Vincent, and help him out a little bit. Maybe that's why he's trying to clickbait it so Warren can get the subs.
Oh, it's convincing me. This is bringing me over.
Well, I mean, it is a tried and true way to get subscribers and views is to have, clickbait titles, and he has a formula that he follows for the anti-Calvinist crowd that they're going to, they're going to click on that and they're going to watch it, and they're going to root the entire way through, and they're not really going to care that that the content isn't there.
The other thing I wanted to mention before we get started is, and I've never really had a good open theist answer this question for me. I want to say something like, "Oh, God knows the future," either with 100% certainty or a lot of certainty, like 99 or 98, right? I'm just thinking to myself, okay, you accuse the Calvinist God or representation of God being morally culpable for his determination, right? Because not only that he knows it will happen, but he decreed that it will happen and didn't stop it, right? He did it anyways. Okay, well, what if you have your God who's 99%, knows 99% of what's going to happen, or some open theists like I think Farber says that he knows it with 100% certainty. I still don't understand how they get out of this moral culpability. Even if it's not the exact amount of moral culpability as the Calvinists would be, as the Calvinist God or the representation of God underneath Calvinism, even if it's not the exact amount of moral culpability there's got to be some residual amount of culpability, right? Am I just like making up stuff? Because to me, this is just obvious. And if I remember correctly, they may have maybe alluded to something like that, but I'm not sure.
I mean, I'd have to think about that, because I think they're going to try to escape it by the normal, knowledge isn't causal, right? Which,
Sure.
Fair enough. I don't claim, we don't claim knowledge is causal, right? The issue for the grounding objection and these types of, the kind of reverse, anti-theodicy against libertarian free will, like they have problems not because knowledge is causal, but because God creates based on his knowledge. God actualizes these things based on his knowledge. And so, so I'm not sure that they're in and around helps kind of get out of that, but I think that'd be the route that they would try.
I'm just saying that's still a residual amount of responsibility held on their conception of God. I think there must be some residual amount. even if it's not 100% morally responsible, or God is
Right.
100% morally responsible there, is it not the case that he's, I don't know, 60% morally responsible?
Well, I push it even farther, right? I mean, I think on open theism, God is. Let me put it this way: if their normal objection against Calvinism, let's just for the sake of argument that it goes through, such that if God brings about or decrees some evil, whether it's causal determinism or it's kind of a weak actualization, whatever it is, right? Let's just for the sake of argument imagine that goes through. Right? Given Calvinism, God brings certain things about for morally sufficient reasons, right? Kind of going into that realm, right?
Yeah.
God can decree a certain evil to come about for morally sufficient reasons, for avoiding greater evils, for bringing about better goods, right? For soul building, right? The Calvinist has access to all those same type of resources that the classical apologist does, for example. The open theist is going to want to say, oh, well, that makes God evil because he brings that about, right? Well, I'm going to say, well, on the open theist view, they don't, on their view, if they want to say, okay, well, it's because of libertarian freedom, right, that there's this evil that happens in the world. To me, that means that it actually removes the ability for them to kind of trace back to these morally sufficient reasons, right? Because for them, God doesn't know what the outcome of this is going to be, because there could be some sin and someone freely, because again, libertarian free will acts. They're going to want to say that, the dynamic omniscience, they're going to want to say he can know the future, but they're not going to say that he can know future, genuinely free actions. Right? So in a no case. So God couldn't know that some evil action, some other person won't have a genuinely free, even worse action.
Right.
Right. So God can't escape. The open theist conception of God can't escape the problem of evil by appeal to morally sufficient reasons, because God can't know what the outcome is going to be, and he can try to work it the best that he can, but he can't know. And so the problem is that on their view, God sits back and does nothing.
There's also another facet to that I've tried to use. So I mentioned to Colton before you came, an article I wrote, why I'm not an open theist. And Jimmy helped co-write it. I'm glad that he's here. He finally showed up because he finally wants to be our friend. But in that article, he made this argument. I love this argument. It goes to kind of the vein of your thought, Tyler, where maybe it puts a kind of moral skepticism on I'm not going to say they hold to divine command theory, but I generally assume like there's some kind of relationship between God and morality on most Christian views.
Yeah.
And it may be the case, since God doesn't know the future, that when you go to God, say for a command or some rule or something about how to live or something, that since he did not foresee your circumstances, he could hopelessly lead you to just moral dilemmas in every situation he tells you, because he doesn't know the future the future and so forth. So it puts a sort of skepticism in terms of trusting in God in terms of those moral principles in the first place, whether they are good for our situation.
Right. That's exactly right.
Love it. Should we get started?
Oh yeah, sorry, I was letting you guys go.
This was a good conversation.
Just vamping. But yeah, let's go with video.
Okay.
Are you on like double speed or?
I am on 1.5. You want me to go up to 1.75?
Yeah, let's see how 1.5 goes.
So tell me if you can hear it.
This is not a problem for our.
And it doesn't.
Yeah. Quiet,
Isaiah doesn't say, "I declare the end from the beginning," because libertarian free will doesn't exist.
They get you in the door with a free weekend trip or dinner, or sometimes just a Visa gift
commercial.
Yeah.
He says, "I am powerful." Isaiah oftentimes, when you're dealing with adherents of classical theism that are engaged in apologetics of that view, they will often conflate a power claim with a knowledge claim, or a single event with the entirety of the operation of God.
And this is one of Tyler's points I think that he will make, essentially, is that if God can blamelessly predestine one sinful event, one sin, which is crucifying Jesus, then he can blamelessly predestine all of them.
Yeah.
And so that's his point, is that incompatibilism, which actually drives me nuts that people call it incompatibilism. It's frustrating that we even have to say libertarian free will. We should just be able to say free will because that's what everyone intuitively understands as free will.
I freaking hate that.
But what was I saying? He was saying that we have a principled objection to God being able to predetermine a sinful thing, and that if we can determine that one sinful thing takes off the ground without him being blameless, then it collapses. But I would just say that, and the event here that we'll talk about is the cross. But Christ said in John 10 that no one takes his life from him, but that he lays it down willingly. So Christ is laying down his life willingly, and God doesn't have to predestine every single event along the way, or even, it's God pre-choosing to do something, to bring something to pass. Does not mean determinism. Does not mean he's causally determining the cross. And so that's the difference that I would make.
Yeah. Can you pause it?
Nations before the foundations of the world, or at the very least, before the events happen, right? There are things that are true prophecies.
Pause.
In order for...
No, hold on a second.
You say pause?
Yeah.
Okay. So, first of all, I do not like going way back to the definitions of liberty. Why do they need to say, like, oh, we shouldn't need to say libertarian free will? Welcome to Philosophy 101. You're defining your definitions. You must say that.
Wait, were you expecting me to argue for my position?
It's helpful. It's just like in math, when you label a certain event, you say C or B. So you don't have to keep saying event or that whole sentence or that whole, like you can just say it's a variable. So it's nice to be able to say libertarian free will so we know what kind of free will you're thinking of. If they're like, oh, this kind of, it doesn't matter because free will is free will. There is no different kinds. Well, then, begging the question.
Yeah, that statement was literally, I wish I could just beg the question of my view unchecked by any type of academic or philosophy.
I don't ever recall you ever saying something like that, Tyler.
No.
I wish I didn't have to actually make a distinction between compatibilism and determinism or something like that.
That'd be like me saying, I wish I didn't have to say Calvinism. Why can't I just say the Bible?
Yeah, that's even worse. It's ridiculous. Obviously, they make different senses of knowledge, and we grant that. And obviously, we say that they're wrong. So they should grant us the same charity. There's different senses of freedom. Then they didn't get into it, but I'm really eager to get into this cross because I know, Tyler, you bring this up a lot, and I would too. The cross was predetermined, right? And so how does it make sense to say that God knew that Christ would die on the cross, the actual class event, but he didn't know the specific actions leading up to that class event? Does that even make sense?
That's exactly why. Oh, go ahead, sorry.
I was just like, if specific events make up a class event, by induction, that's how you get it. If it's specific events make up a class event. If modal operator on the specific events is I don't know, because God can't know indeterminate libertarian free choices, how can he actually know the class events if that modal operator transfers? I just don't see how, and I think you brought that up, Tyler, with response to latent flowers, I believe. Mm-hmm. One of your podcast episodes or something, but does anyone else have anything to say? I just wanted to get off.
That's why in the first video, Colton, I said, and I'm stealing this from Jimmy, but this is sort of like a weird open theist fatalism where you just kind of have this little base event in some localized area, and then you just isolate it from all the other facts of history. And then it just magically happens.
They need to tell us not what they believe, but how it's actually cogent. They need to show us how that's actually something reasonable, because I clearly don't see it.
Yeah,
if God knows that Jesus would die on the cross, take determinism out of it. We would say he knows because he determined it, but regardless, let's just say he just knows, simply knows. And how is it the case that all the other factors that go into every single thing, Pontius Pilate, the Pharisees, the trial, Barabbas. I mean, Peter's denial of Christ. It's all these things leading up. Garden of Gethsemane, leading up to this pivotal moment. I didn't know. But wait, he knew that he would die on the cross.
All right. Yeah, no, I have the same like I try to imagine it, try to relate it to something like, say God determined that I'm going to get hit by a bus and die tomorrow. Okay, but mind you, and that that's been decided way in the past or something. Or, whenever God decides those sorts of things. And oh boy, but he didn't determine my birth, my life, or any of the other little events in between my parent, or nothing related to me. All those things are just whimsically come about, and then boom, bam. But there's this random event. Maybe instead I was never born, but God pushed me into existence for that one moment because He knew I was going to get hit by a bus that day, just to get hit.
Yeah,
that's. Well,
well, I mean, you have other. I mean, there are so many ways that you could hash this out. Like, if God can't know, right? Because they want to say they don't want to be outright heretics. They don't want to deny omniscience, right? So what they conveniently ignore is that the very thing that they think God can't know is quote unquote genuinely free. That is libertarian, incompatibilistically free actions, right? Because they think in principle you can't know that type of thing because it's unsettled, right? They are incompatibilists, right? They agree with the hard determinist that if something isn't determined, or if something is determined, it isn't free, right? So, and since something isn't determined, then God can't. There's no truth value yet, so God can't know it, right? So they're like, oh well, Tyler doesn't charitably handle it. No, I completely understand your view. I know you want to say that God understands and knows certain future things. But by that you mean probability, and you mean these little island things. But the little island things, you want them to be a certain event. But that certain event is so laden with choices that I don't understand, as you guys have said, how it's even intelligible to say God can't know, genuinely free future choices. But He can know X, where X is entirely derivative of trillions and trillions and trillions of future, quote unquote, genuinely free choices.
I love how you bring that derivative in there.
It doesn't and I bring up this example. So let he says, oh well we know God knows that Jesus is going to come back. He might not know when or where or how or all that kind of stuff, which. I mean, you're already way off the reservation by that point. But we live in the nuclear age, right? Tomorrow, or in 1 minute from now, there could be a mad scientist who blows up the world, right? Such that there's nothing for Jesus to come back to. There's nobody left for Jesus to come back to, right? So it's entirely possible that God might be planning to have Jesus come back, but that be falsified, right? Because the world could literally end by human free choices. So even though even when they want to say God knows these island events that Jesus is going to come back, and we say, well, He can't even know that because it could be falsified. Like God's knowledge, quote unquote, knowledge of that, He could still be wrong. So what does it mean to say that God knows these future things if He could be wrong about them? The view is just incomprehensible to me.
I don't know. I've loved Drew, and I like Drew a lot more than Warren personally. But right, it's just, to me, it's incomprehensible. It just doesn't make logical sense.
No, and they want to pretend as if their view is, that's the academic version, and have you not read our source? All this kind of stuff. And I want to be like, look, you can't pretend that you're that well informed about the entailments of certain freedom of the will and what falls under the philosophy of action if you literally don't understand why we call it incompatibilism and compatibilism. Like that's I'm pretty sure, Colton, that you teach your high schoolers those terms. That's not even, I wouldn't even say that's philosophy 101. Like that's high school philosophy. So it's just you can't pretend that your system is this well thought out, robust, philosophically informed view when you don't even understand the most basic fundamental terms. And they're complaining when I say, I don't know if you caught this, because I point out, well, if incompatibilism is true, it's a principled position. If I can give you a single example that violates the principle, the position is false. That's not a deterministic libertarian thing. That's just how logic works, right? If you take a firm principled position such that X and Y are contradictory in some way, necessarily, all one needs to do to falsify the view is find one exception. That's how principled views work. Has nothing to do with the fact that I'm a determinist and they're libertarian. Right, so he can be not happy with the fact that I say that their view is fragile because I only need one exception, but that's not a Tyler thing. That's just how logic works.
So can you guys hear me?
Yep.
Yeah.
I hear you now.
Okay. Yeah, when you were commenting, Tyler, on the fact that given these people believe in something like a libertarian butterfly effect, where my freedom at any given moment is interconnected with past free choices that I've made. And in fact, the historical significance of the choice I'm making is caught up in all of the choices that lead up to that moment. And it wouldn't be meaningful if everything leading up to that moment had just been determined by God. Noting how,
right,
like you just said, okay, well, that just means God can't know those things. So what does it mean to really say he has beyond that, or rather beside that? There's the fact that if you want to hold that God's knowledge is determinate, so he knows that this will happen for sure, that just means that you've got fatalism on your hands, that regardless what I choose to do, history is already set in stone. So why does it matter? Right? It's the libertarian who's the fatalist, not the determinist. The determinist thinks that, the Calvinist thinks that through all the free actions that God has determined, the end results are accomplished, so that God's sovereignty preserves the freedom of creatures and their significance all at once. But from the libertarian position, there's just random choices being made, and God arbitrarily comes down and says, well, regardless of whatever you choose, I'm going to make this happen anyways, and there's nothing you can do about it. Right. That's Greek paganism.
Yeah, well, and I think while you were talking, it struck me as well that their view is an indeterministic view, right? So if indeterminism means that the prior event doesn't determine the secondary event, right? You can't make it any type of causal inference from A to B. Right. Because if A is indeterminate with respect to B or not B, then you can't, given A, you can't know that it will be B or not B. Right. So if that type of thing is the case, then they can't even say that God, once God sees or learns that this happens, then he knows which outcome is going to follow, because it's an indeterministic system. He literally can't know that. Yeah. And what I'm saying is it's a double-edged sword. They lose either way, because even if they want to be silly and say, well, he just magically knows anyways, then you can just turn around and say, oh, okay, well, welcome to fatalism. Right. All you did for your system was choose one bad view over another. Thank you so much for playing. Right.
I'm going to continue playing. Everybody still on the video?
Yeah.
Okay.
Let's do it.
As people who hold an open view, we flatly reject that God can accomplish prophecy, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. There's I've never read any of the prophecies in the Bible, and I reject them altogether. And
it's silly.
This is the interesting thing about our view, though, is that in this section, what Tyler will go on to describe in Isaiah 40 to 46 or so, there's a bit where Cyrus is prophesied as coming forth as a king, that he's going to use him to, ransack Israel and stuff like that. And many open theists, which is why we don't really like that label, I prefer dynamic omniscience, will say, he couldn't have known that his name would be Cyrus. So this is Deutero Isaiah. This was really written later, and and then you're undermining the inspiration and the inerrancy of Scripture. Whereas we would say, in the same way that God ensured that John the Baptist had the name John, can he not ensure that a guy named Cyrus is raised up for the purposes that he wants them to. So.
We don't deny God the power to name a baby. Like we don't. Please, if you walk away from this video, please understand that we do not have that weak of a view of God's power. We actually believe He is the most powerful and can accomplish whatever He wants by way of His power and His intellect, including in a world with image bearers possessing self-determination that He's given them. So we hold a high view of God's power.
So I think it's really important to point out that. Okay, I'm not going to say it as cheeky as it popped into my head. We're not saying that they don't affirm that God can do these things, right? We're saying that given their system, it's inconsistent for them to affirm these things.
A logical coherency.
Correct. So when they're like, oh, well, we've never read a Bible prophecy. Great. You claim that Bible prophecy is possible given your view.
How?
That's exactly right. Our argument is well, no, given your view, it shouldn't be possible. That's exactly the problem. Simply saying, oh, well, we affirm prophecy doesn't resolve the objection. Right?
I also like to add, like, they're surprised by the skepticism. Sorry, Jimmy, I saw you on mute. They're surprised by our skepticism about, us thinking that they hold to some kind of, like, serious view of prophecy. On the other hand, they hang out and they steal arguments, or they borrow, they share thoughts with people like Chris Fisher, whose arguments are often that there are just false prophecies in the Bible, which prove God doesn't know the future. Right. So, I mean, it's nice and also the Cyrus thing. How freaking lucky can you be? There's luckily this guy named Cyrus came from this area, did this and that, and became a powerful leader, or at least the Jews from the Babylonian king. Talk about lucky. I mean, I don't know.
Is this just a random baby that God is just naming? Like, how does He even know? I remember when first watching the video, it struck me as odd, like, oh, our God still has the power to name babies. How? He doesn't name the babies. The indeterminate free creatures name the babies.
Yeah, that's my question. Is their view seems to be either entirely incoherent. Well, God can name babies. Okay, I'm pretty sure Cyrus's parents named him. But no, unless they want to make the claim that somehow God deterministically overrided their freedom and forced them to cause them to name him Cyrus.
Then they would be compatibilists.
Well, or they're going to say that the parents didn't freely choose him, name him Cyrus. That in the naming they were robots.
Exactly.
Given their view, right?
Oh yeah.
So it's like, okay, so is your view that God brought about that his name would be Cyrus and his parents freely chose to name him Cyrus, thus you're a compatibilist and your entire argument falls apart on something as trivial as a baby name? Or is your view really that in the naming of Cyrus to bring about this prophecy, God turned them for a moment into robots to name him Cyrus? Because those are the only two options available to the incompatibilist.
And if you press it even further, let's just go back to the cross. If you press it further and say that, okay, yes, God can determine the crucifixion to happen. If we press the latter horn, everyone's a robot during this one action. That means that none of them, if they're going to keep their view consistent, can be held morally responsible. None of the Pharisees, not Pontius Pilate, not Peter for denying, none of them can be held morally responsible for Christ being on the cross. There's literally a God determinate, a efficient determinatory action on their view. And I feel like that's really devastating session.
And Jimmy, calling on you now. I've seen you on mute a few times.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I was basically going to say what Tyler said, but I think you guys would appreciate it. I picked up this, Vincent will remember this. I picked up this analogy from Mullins. It's genius. And I think it perfectly applies to this situation, that libertarians here are kind of playing the game with two decks of cards. They have the libertarian free will deck for whenever they wish to assert that this is how they maintain moral responsibility. And then they have the fatalism deck for whenever they want to maintain that God somehow magically knows the future and ensures that he knows certain things are going to happen. And then they just play cards from whichever deck is convenient at the moment in time. And the compatibilist is over here wondering, like, why would we choose either of these crappy cards? I don't like. Let's just play a different game.
Right. Yeah.
Molinism, Arminianism, Open-Theism, and the card dealers. Am I right?
Yeah, I mean, you gotta play the hand you're dealt. You gotta know when to hold them and know when to fold them. Know when to walk away and run from open theism. Yeah, I mean, and then if you think about like the God knows God can bring about the name of a baby. Okay, but the prophecy was that Cyrus would be a great king and that he would bring the Israelites back into the land. Do you know how many trillions of free will decisions had to keep Cyrus from being assassinated, probably, from being in these certain wars, from being in the power position that he was in these military. What's that?
Other empires arising.
Other empires arising, the military victories that would have had, like the trillions and trillions of what. So unless they want to say, okay, from the time of this prophecy to the time that Cyrus makes the declaration for the Israelites to return, well, that whole period, we're just going to call that a chunk of determinism where God just makes sure everything comes about and there's no free will during that period of time because he's going to bring out his prophecy. Like there's no other way to get around it because there's so many trillions of free will decisions that if one of them went wrong, the prophecy wouldn't come true.
Basically, I hate to make the reference, and it's horrible, but God, on their view, is just Jar Jar Binks. He's just lucky and lands in the perfect situations to escape things. That's what I'm guessing here.
Well, what you don't understand is that open theism is the single most powerful proof that Jar Jar Binks is secretly the Sith Lord, controlling all history, all Star Wars truth behind the scenes. No, I'm just kidding. Go ahead.
Well, the real Star Wars truth is that the rebels were actually the terrorists. But that's for a different video.
I was just gonna say that I know when I pressed open theist, Will Duffy actually, which is Tyler's best friend.
I like Will Duffy.
But Will Duffy,
he's a nice guy.
He says God is omnicompetent. Of course he could make it and make sure it falls according to his plan, even though he doesn't have to override the agency of these indeterminate free will creatures.
Well, see, this is what's so funny to me is that Chris Fisher was mentioned, right? And Chris Fisher, in light of what Tyler and C squared here are saying, like, oh, there's all these trillions and billions of ridiculous amounts of interconnected nexus of decisions, and God just gets lucky. Chris Fisher will stand up here and be like, "Whoa, it's easy to predict a football game, don't you think?" I mean, I've predicted a football game.
Yeah,
I'm sorry. If humans can do it, God can do it.
Basically, the Super Bowl will
they can't. That's the problem.
That's a fact.
Oh.
Well, I mean, okay, so if it's, I mean, look, Chris Fisher,
Marty McFly, like you can't do it.
Yeah, you can't do it perfectly. We fail at it all the time. So is he saying that God is like the giant celestial bookie? So, like, it's just, I mean, with Chris Fisher, I honestly don't know. I mean, Seafish for a while literally thought that God was like just, and I'm not even exaggerating. Hopefully he's changed his view, but Vincent, you might remember this, where he thought God was literally a humanoid being, like up on a platform, not like
looking down,
celestial, like literally up, like north, up there, looking down on it.
The Bible says God looks. How do you think he gains that? He sees things, and then he knows what you're doing.
Yeah. So I love Warren and Drew. I don't know if I want to lump them too much in with Seafish over there. So
you continue.
I'll only do as much as necessary. I'll play.
Power, and we hold a high view of his knowledge. And so when God actualizes prophecy, it's not because he's basically saying, I'm giving you this decree and that decree and every sin along the way. Because in the video, I don't know if we'll get there or not, but Tyler makes the same faulty reasoning that recently James White made when we were having our discussion. And that is that God simply is not powerful enough. He's not intelligent enough, or through some other deficit in his character, God cannot accomplish his purpose in a world with free creatures. And we say, no, that's wrong. The scripture says he does. And so,
I mean, nowhere have I said that. I guarantee nowhere has White said that, right? And this is the example of I brought at the beginning. All that is saying, if we beg the question of incompatibilism, do an external critique of compatibilism, then import it back into an internal critique, and then attribute that to the compatibilists as if that's what they're saying, then look how dumb that is what they're saying. Like that is, Warren, if you're listening, I'm sorry, but that is one of the most uncharitable, inaccurate ways to try to deal with someone else's position. So, anyways,
that's a power claim.
That's a power claim. It's framing.
Or with libertarianly free creatures, we would say. Yeah.
Truly free.
For God to make a true prophecy, for example, about Jesus being born in Bethlehem. Right? Think of all the astronomical number of other, now you're going to get into open theism, libertarianly free choices that God cannot know, that have to be in that case in order for that to happen.
Again, I love this.
Objection. Sorry.
I love this because this is, I often hear this from the open perspective towards the open perspective dynamic omniscience, is this is an argument from incredulity. This is, think about all of the factors that would be involved in getting the Messiah to be born in Bethlehem. There's no way God could have taken all of that into account and seen to it that the Messiah was born in Bethlehem. Like, okay, that's your personal incredulity towards the position, but that's not an argument.
Mm-mm. And I think that it's an incredulity based in a low view of God's power and knowledge. It's simply, I can't conceive of a God that powerful and brilliant that he could accomplish his will in such a world. Therefore, all of our choices lay at the feet of God, and I'm essentially absolved, even though he still holds me accountable. It creates serious issues, because if we're saying,
again, just a dumb, I'm sorry, it's just a dumb rejoinder, right? First, the argument isn't one from simple incredulity. Right. The argument is, given your own position about libertarianly free choices that God cannot know the truth of, such that the outcome, however, is contingent upon very specific outcomes. Right. You've said God can't know X, but Y is contingent upon the truth of X. So it's not a simple bald statement of incredulity, right? It's an internal critique of your own view. The other thing, this whole again, it's just so uncharitable to be like it's a low view of power, and just because you can't fathom it. Okay, two thoughts. One, can you explain how God can? The answer is going to be no, and they're going to appeal to mystery, which they're going to flip out every time a Calvinist ever appeals to mystery, but they have to do the same thing. The other thing is the Calvinists, the compatibilists, can literally make the exact same argument backwards, right? I could say, okay, well, God can determine it and keep us sufficiently free so we're morally responsible. And they say, oh, well, how can God do that? Well, do you have a low view of God's power that God can't do that? Do you have such a low view that God can't actually determine something to happen while keep us morally responsible? What a low view. Like, we can all play that silly type of game, but that's not a good way to respond to these arguments.
Just to build on how arbitrary that is, another example, like imagine somebody responding to both the Calvinists and the open theists saying, no. Both of you have low views of God's power. Of course, God can create square circles. And he can make men women, and he can make it so that we're both determined and libertarianly free, right? Like, you can sweep under the rug any kind of nonsense you want under the posturing that it's somehow God's power that makes it possible. That doesn't mean anything. I mean, there's no explanatory weight that's being offered under the word power. It just sounds really good. It's like a politician waving a little flag around saying, we've got the power. Yeah, but that doesn't mean anything.
Yeah, I never understood this claim either, because when it comes to God's power, I like that. It's really just like a politician waving around. I mean, when we look at God's power and God's omniscience, we think about logical possibilities and what's logical, right? In one sense, or in some sense, we are saying that it is not logical for God to have prophesied the future, but yet not know the future. That's why he determines, and if he determines it, that's how he knows the future. That's the Calvinistic position. So that's logical. Or it's logical to say that God can only do that which is logically possible. So he can't create a rock so big that he can't lift it. These things don't just, I know that the avenue usually goes towards his omnipotence and not necessarily his omniscience. And the Molinists try to play this game too. When we press a grounding objection, they either lead to super comprehension or say, oh, well, God's God. And just like Stratton does, like, oh, God's God, so totally can know it. He knows all truth propositions. That just misses the point. And so this kind of idea of this rebuttal or pathetic rejoinder of pleading to personal incredulity misses the point of our original objection. Nothing to do with us not fathoming that this could happen, right? It has everything to do with what is logically cogent, what is logically possible. I think that's where we need to ground the debate, not in these silly claims.
Right. It's just like, it's not like, oh, well, that idea doesn't sit right with my tummy. Right? It's nothing like that. It's like, okay, principle Y contradicts principle X, but we're supposed to affirm both. And also, sorry, all I have is right now is Palpatine just going unlimited power. It's just in my mind. So
yeah. I think one of the ways that might help explain it is, think of Cyrus's declaration to have the Jews go back to the land, right? So imagine that there's a static set of conditions that would bring that about, right? Let's just pretend there's 26 A through Z. Those are all the number of conditions. Right, they're gonna say, okay, well, it could be any of those free ones. God doesn't know which one it is, right? Because those are all libertarian free, but He knows the total number of possibilities, right? But the prophecy is in the kind of the secondary anchored, the secondary anchored outcome, right? But if Q in the first set is a necessary condition for the outcome, right? Such that the only way to know with certainty that the outcome will be what takes place, not what could be, but what will be, right? Because they're going to want to say He knows prophecy. He knows the outcome of the prophecy. Well, Q is a necessary, you have to know that Q is going to obtain in order to know that the prophecy is going to be fulfilled. Right? But they've just said God doesn't know of the set A through Z which one will be the case. Just which one could, right? So they're talking out of both sides of their mouth. They're saying God can't know that Q will obtain, but that God will know or does know that Q will obtain, right? So they are literally affirming a contradiction in order to try to salvage, right? Because they don't want to come across as just complete heretics who just deny the sovereignty of God and deny any type of foreknowledge, because foreknowledge is a biblical word, and they do the same type of redefinition that all open theists do, right? But in order to do that, they have to say that God doesn't know Q, but that God does know Q. So it's just that level of. But when they say, "Oh well, are you saying God isn't powerful enough to do that? Powerful enough to work a contradiction?" No, I mean, no. In the same way Jimmy said, God's not powerful enough to make a square circle, because that's not a thing.
It's not to put it another way. It's not even a power, right? Like, imagine someone who says, "Well, God's powerful enough that He can be weak and ignorant and get his butt kicked by the devil." Yes, true power. Like, right? What kind of idiot is that? Yeah, it's just. It's also. Would you not? Somebody who can do this better than me, but there is something theologically tragic that you end up caring more about man's freedom, so that you orient the power of God around that concept, rather than taking a step back and saying, perhaps we should figure out who God is first and have a reverence for his majesty, and let that be the ground for our determining how man's will relates to him. I just feel like there's a loss of the right order there. There's a certain almost comedy to, and I'm there are Calvinists that are guilty of this, and I've been guilty of this sin in my life. But man, it just seems really. It seems to be a really big problem with that kind of theology that we're listening to.
Yeah.
Saying that we're free to do exactly what God determined, and everything that we do is what God determined, right? We can say weakly actualizing, or we can say that we're the seventh domino in a series that God pushed the first one over, but ultimately it always goes back to the starting premise, and it lays the blame at God, and it's accusing him of actualizing and causing our sin, which is it's consistent with what Calvin had stated.
And he's the ultimate cause. He's the ultimate cause. He's not the proximate cause, but he's the ultimate cause. But so what? You just add a few extra steps. And to be fair, what Tyler is saying here is he's attempting to represent a position that we don't hold, which is God cannot know the future free decisions of people. And therefore, if God can't know the future free decisions, how can he possibly take into account all the future free decisions that will be involved in bringing the Messiah to Bethlehem and having him to be born there? But this is not something that I think that it's not difficult for God to influence people to do things. It's just not difficult.
Think about this. He says, I work all things together. The Calvinists would say that's a deterministic working that could not be done otherwise, that everything is going perfectly according to plan. That includes all sin and evil. But imagine a holy and living God actually operating in the world that we're describing. That is, in my mind, the God of Scripture, the living, the holy, the powerful, the brilliant, one who is active in his creation, not some sort of deist who hit the first domino, not some sort of a God who gave us the desires to sin, and so we're perfectly obeying him, but he calls it rebellion. So I see some major problems within this position, which led me to abandon it in search of what I thought was the most biblical, and that's.
So he said a couple of things like, God gives us the desire to sin. Oh my gosh. It's so just gross. It's not gross because that's the entailment of our position. It's gross because it's such a misrepresentation. I can't even fathom how they get there. It's just ridiculous. You guys' thoughts?
Yeah. So I mean, there was like 10 times in there where I wanted to say like, stop, they're begging the question, hit play. Stop, they're begging the question, hit play. Like, I mean, they're doing it over and over again. So people listening, we're not just letting these things go by. It's just asked and answered. So much. But it reminds me of sitting there. Have you ever talked to an atheist? And when I hear Dan Barker talk about his prior experience as a Christian, right? Part of me wants to go, and I'm not trying to do a no Scotsman fallacy, but part of me wants to be like, dude, you never understood Christianity. Like never. If what you're saying, because sometimes your kind of quote unquote remembrance of what you used to believe is really colored by your current evaluations. So maybe they didn't actually think this way when they were, but like if what they're saying is true, like you listen to these atheists and they're like, they basically thought that Christianity was you had to work really, really hard. And you had to be the best, and you had to put on the best face, and you always had to look perfect and all this kind of stuff. Otherwise God would get you. And like, when I listen to that kind of thing, I'm like, dude, I would have left that too.
Yeah.
Right. When Warren's saying this about like, look, I used to be a Calvinist for 20 years and I believed it and I drank the Kool-Aid and all this kind of stuff. When he's describing what he thinks Calvinism is, I want to be like, dude, I would have left that too. Like, if that's what you understood, I'm glad you got out, because that's stupid. But that's not what historic Calvinism is. You're just misunderstanding it.
Yeah, they also, Drew said that, but he's the ultimate cause, and so what? It just adds a few extra steps, or it's just the first domino. No. This idea of dominoes, it may have been popularized by some maybe low-level Calvinists, perhaps. The big names of Calvinism, such as Sproul, John Frame, even going back to Bavinck, or Territon, or even Edwards, none of them have argued. None of them have argued that it's under Calvinism and God's. Maybe Calvin has alluded to it slightly, but I don't think he ever really said it was. This is how it had to be. That method of God's determination, or the model of God's determination, must be looked at as a set of dominoes. I can't think of a single Reformed author alive today that actually argues this. Can you guys? Because
no,
it's just not what we think at all.
James Anderson and Calvinism and the Problem of Evil had a really good essay.
I was going to go to that next. James Anderson, in The First Sin, the book, The Calvinism and the Problem of Evil, he describes that the domino model is actually a bastardization of the Calvinist model. And honestly, he describes it as Calvinists should reject it because it doesn't make room for the creature-creator distinction.
That's right.
It puts everything on a horizontal line. You need something else, like the authorial model of providence, which is found in a plethora of Reformed literature, John Frame, Anderson, a couple others, that it makes the distinction between the creature and the creator a lot more distinct. And that also allows for a good model to preserve secondary causation, primary causation, and the like. So they think that, God is this deist God who just pushes the first domino and then it just, what? I'm like at a loss how you get deism from Calvinism. And if you disagree with Tulip, holy crap, the whole thing about Tulip is very personal. Unconditional election, irresistible grace. I do not see how they get deism by first domino, then everything just goes according to plan. Maybe that's the case with scientific determinism. It's not the case with theological determinism, and obviously you can't conflate the two because that would be question begging and equivocation and probably a straw man. So
I just wanted to build on that last point, that on the contrary, the libertarian view of God is premised on a deistic conception of the universe, because God is seen as this this creator of like a first state, who then takes his hands off the vehicle and just lets man do whatever he wants, and then occasionally comes back down in the world to ensure that things go the way he wants them to go. Cough, cough, once again, whether or not you choose to go left or right. The choices of man are things to which God is indifferent when he comes down to determine those things. So it's really the libertarian premise that has a deistic view of God. The amazing thing when you consider the Calvinist point of view is that God's so intimately caught up in the decisions of his creatures. At every moment, he is sustaining you, making you who you are in each of your decisions, freely to act in accord with your own identity. So, yeah, the authorial model is the antithesis of a deistic view of God.
I'm at a loss.
I mean,
more into causation, but I won't.
Think of the level of rebellion that has to take place to say that somehow I can freely choose, and God, and it has to be apart from God determining what my nature is and who I am and my life and my experience. And like think of the level of autonomy and rebellion that takes, and how antithetical that is to the Christian claim, where we thank God for knitting us together, I thank God for who we are, for what we are, for how we are, for what we will be. I mean, just the level of rejection of God as my creator, not just my creator kind of in that deistic far removed. He just knocked the ball rolling, but he didn't determine who I was, right? Because if he determined who I was and what I liked and my preferences and my personality, then that would be forcing me to choose certain things, right? Why they'll be like, oh well, God just knows if I put a bowl of chocolate or a thing of crap in front of you, which one are you going to choose? It's not determined. And I want to be like, yes, it is. The reason why I'm going to pick chocolate ice cream and not crap is specifically because of the nature that God has given me to prefer one and not the other. So, just think of the level of desire for autonomy apart from God as my creator in order to try to deny that.
Yeah. I just want to say that there seems to me to be like a kind of a dark side to that imagine you're in a church and you've been friends with some people for a while, but now you're saying that you're going to come help them do some yard work or something, and they point out that, well, maybe you won't. You've been faithful to do all this stuff for years, and you've been a really good friend to us, but the fact of the matter is, you have a free will, and so that means there's no reason to know. There's no reason that engages us to say, yeah, we can trust that you're going to show up tomorrow. Like, expand that. Imagine all the times in church when your intimacy with other members of the church is totally contingent on your ability to know people because of what they've done, right? But that's completely thrown out the window if the fact of the matter is, well, whenever I choose chocolate ice cream over crap, that's just random. It's not because of who I am. That's just, the slot machine of my free will landed on chocolate today, so that's what I'm going to have.
Yeah, and guess what? I never freely chose to have a chocolate, a boring nature. That was never a decision I made. Sorry, just. Comes with the territory of being, a human, that God has made us that way.
Yeah, I like in Pignon's book his talk about the God-given self.
Yeah,
I like that language. That's all I have to say.
The God-givenness, God has given our nature. Or our agency. He doesn't detract away from our agency through determinism. So,
all right, hit the video, hit the play button, do the thing.
What led me to here
is going to come is that open theism fails the test of a true God given by Yahweh in the Old Testament against the prophets of Baal. Right. So in Isaiah 41, verses 21.
Selling physical products is not the best way of making money on Amazon in 2021. Now, yes, that model does work.
24. Yahweh is kind of antagonizing these prophets, and he says, "Present your case," the Lord says. "Bring forward your strong arguments," the King of Jacob says. Right, that's Yahweh. "Let them bring forth and declare to us what is going to take place. As for the former events, declare what they were, that we may consider them and know their outcome, or announce to us what is coming. Declare the things that are going to come afterward, that we may know that you are gods. Indeed, do good or evil, that we may anxiously look about us and fear together. Behold, you are of no account, and your work amounts to nothing. He who chooses you is an abomination."
So, one of the things that's really interesting here is if you stop and ask questions like, why does God antagonize creatures who could do nothing other than what he decreed they do? Does verse 24 say, "He who I unchangeably decreed to choose you is an abomination"? Or is this another biblical reference to genuine free will and actual moral agency? So here Tyler is using what he believes.
It's genuine free will. What is that? Libertarian free will? Here's the argument.
Hey, listen. No. You gotta understand. This is a new philosophic enterprise. We've learned that by adding the word genuine as an adjective to a noun that we want to believe in, we've won the argument. We've won the debate. That's all you have to do. You just add that word.
This is the latent flowers fallacy. Okay, it's quite simple.
The problem is it's going all over the internet. Tim Stratton does the exact same all over his videos. It's quite annoying. They want to say, if I actually have the genuine choice and I'm genuinely free, well, then yeah, I have moral agency.
Well,
why is that kind of freedom? Why is that kind of genuine, quote, unquote, freedom, libertarian freedom, the categorical ability? Why is that necessary for responsibility and genuine, true agency?
So what I mean by the latent flowers fallacy is the fallacy when you go to interpret some given passage, that in every time you use it to advocate anything regarding Calvinism in some small facet or larger, it always has to say those specific things that are also true of Calvinism, but you're not relevantly arguing from the text. Right, so he's just like, well, where does it say God decreed from eternity past with no, because in, the knowledge, it comes in different ways, the forms, and, Platonism. Where does it say that? Well, it's not in the text. It's just, that's that kind of criticism. It's just ridiculous.
They say, well, how does that make sense if you're determined? Or something like that, right? Warren alluded to that too.
This one's a different one. This one's just like, it's not explicitly said that there's determinism.
This is what you're getting at is when they say, "Oh well, the text doesn't say for God so loved the elect."
Right. Exactly.
Right. Because they want to make any time that there's any type of connection to a doctrine, that any type of inference has to be synthetically identical to the full developed doctrine from all the passages.
Well, I mean, they have that argument, Tyler. I mean, look, all you have to do is open up to Exodus and Leviticus, and guys, they have the free will offering. It's over. It's gone.
No, Colton, I'm not trying to undermine. What you're saying is definitely something they do all the time.
No. Yeah, I agree with what you're saying too. I'm just making a separate case, whereas additionally do that where it's like, oh, well, you have a choice. Well, choice obviously means libertarian freedom. Oh, it's moral agency. That obviously means or entails libertarian freedom. So how does it make sense to be determined? And it's a contradiction and blah, blah, blah. It gets old after a while.
Yeah, like Tyler is just arguing for exhaustive foreknowledge. That's fair, Tyler, right?
Yep.
You're not arguing, look, God irresistibly decreed from the beginning of foundation of world. It's not in the passage, but I believe it's from places. It's not relevant, okay, dude? Stay on point. All right. Sorry.
No, yeah, and I think it's really fast. I mean, the main one of the main problems you guys have hit on a bunch, and this is the funny part is they'll say one thing and they make like 6 errors. Like we can all point to different problems with the same statement. But I think this is kind of what Colton was getting at is when they say, well, why is God telling them to do something if that they couldn't do otherwise, right? And we're just going to be like, well, I mean, they could do otherwise, right? I mean, the compatibilism doesn't say they couldn't do otherwise. We don't think they could categorically do otherwise. We don't think they could do somehow metaphysically do other than what they had decreed. But they could conditionally do otherwise, right? I mean, these are basic distinctions. So whenever the incompatibilist or the libertarian does this type of objection, well, it's like, well, is God trying to redeem his own decrees? Why is he telling us if they, why is he commanding them to do X if they couldn't do otherwise? All that they're doing, again, is just begging the question of incompatibilism and then imputing that back to the compatibilist as if that's somehow, internal critique. That's just an invalid way to argue.
Invalid isn't in the text, so I don't know.
Okay. It's in the ancient Aramaic.
Yeah.
Leaves as a proof text to refute the dynamic or an open view, but we would see this as affirming our position. And again, I think we're going to start to see where we get confused with power versus knowledge claims as well. Is anything you want to add here?
I would say, I want to show everyone something. It's not on my screen, but what did I do with it? So this is going to come up here in Isaiah 40 to 46. And if you I could probably cast my screen here to show everyone. Share screen. So here's Isaiah chapter 41. Can everybody see that? Probably needs to be bigger.
Yeah, you might want to zoom in. Oh, there you go. That's good.
So here, the context here is who has performed and done it, calling the generations from the beginning. So he's calling people, the generations, from the beginning. So he's talking to people that are already existing. Who has performed and done it? And so then down here, what was it, verse 14 that he said? That chooses you as an abomination?
I think it's verse 20.
Oh, here it is. Indeed, you are nothing, and your work is nothing. So he says, show the things that are to come hereafter, that we may know you are gods. Yes, wait for it. Yes, do good or evil, that we may dismay and see it together. And then he goes on to talk about what he is planning to do. So what you'll see that Tyler's premise here is that if God knows the past in exhaustive detail, we would all agree that he does. If God doesn't know the past in the same exact way that he knows the future in exhaustive detail, fully certain, then he's not the true God. Then Yahweh is not the true God. But is that the context of these passages? Is it trying to compare how God knows the past to how God knows the future? Or is God simply saying, listen, I'm going to declare to you what I'm about to do. Do something good or bad, and then show us and then tell us about it. Okay? He's mocking them because they can't do anything. This isn't God fortune telling about what he knows is going to happen. It's him saying, I'm about to show you that I'm the real deal by saying, this is what I'm going to do. And then I'm going to stir up the king from the north, and I'm going to bring him here. And then you're going to know it was me. So we'll talk more about this because he's going to.
Yeah. So you'll notice I love when they do this. Context kills. I'm going to go to one verse 20 verses before, and then I'm going to skip 20 verses, and I'm going to like the hermeneutics of these guys is unbelievable. But my argument wasn't that God is fortune telling, right? That's and I should say this isn't my argument, right? This is, if you read any commentary on Isaiah, right, like non-Calvinist commentaries, this is not a Calvinist thing, right? The challenge is not, well, I'm God, I'm a fortune teller, and you're not, right? Mm-hmm. I don't disagree with Drew, what he just said, that God is saying, look, I'm God, you're going to know because I'm going to say that this is what's going to happen, and I'm going to go bring it about. That's fine. But notice the challenge in the actual verses is when he's actually taunting them, he doesn't just say, do something good or bad, right? He doesn't just say, do something so that we can know. He doesn't just say, let them bring forward. He says, let them declare to us what's going to take place. What's needed to declare the future? You have to know what the future is. He says, as the former events, declare what they were so that we may consider their outcome, right? Tell us what happened in the past because those are determinative. Those are causal for what comes afterwards, or announce to us what's coming. Declare the things that are going to come afterward. Well, how would they know what's going to come afterward? They have to know what the future is. And he said, so he's Yahweh himself in this challenge is making the direct comparison to their ability to know and declare the future with certainty by knowing the causal connections, right? They're not indeterminate. He's saying, if you are a true God, you will know. Yeah, and you will be able to declare, not all these things could possibly happen. Hey, I'm God because I know all the different ways that it could possibly be, right? Is that enough for them to pass the test? Could they say, well, it could be A, B, C, D, E, F, G, or H. Therefore, I'm God, right? He's saying, no, tell us what's going to happen. Right? Not what could, don't tell us what could happen. Tell us what's going to happen. Don't be dynamically omniscient, be omniscient. Right? So Drew is entirely missing what the challenge is of the passage.
That's a power claim. It's a strange view. Oh, wow. Did I have any thoughts on this? No, I don't. Okay, I'm going to play it.
I'm going to talk more about this Isaiah 40 to 46, but that's my rant on that. I can't remove there you go.
Remember the former things long past, for I am Yahweh, and there is no other. I am Yahweh, and there is none like me, declaring the end from the beginning, and from ancient times the things that have not yet been done, saying, my purpose will be established, and I will accomplish my pleasure. If a God is
one thing too, I want to point out here. So here's a comment where it's like, if you affirm, Drew, that the future is partially open and God can accomplish what he wants, you're a compatibilist.
People don't understand. Compatibilism is not God choosing to accomplish things that he wants to happen, and people are free. Compatibilism is determinism. Everything is causally determined. Your thoughts, your actions, your words. He micromanages your diarrhea. Everything is determined. Like, so saying God can do
false. False. I don't know how else to say it. You should probably, Drew, get your definitions from actual Calvinist scholars. Now, granted, let's be charitable here. There are some Calvinist scholars who do say that yes, compatibilism does entail determinism, that it is a type of determinism, namely soft determinism. Sure, okay, there are some who do that. We can call them, let's just say, substantive compatibilists. But does that mean all Calvinists are substantive compatibilists? And should all Calvinists be substantive compatibilists? No. Just like John C. Wingard, he teaches at Covenant College. He makes the distinction between substantive compatibilism and the other side of the coin, simple compatibilism, where it is just the thesis, as Tyler would say, like in principle, like just the thesis that freedom or moral responsibility is compatible with determinism. That is it. It says nothing about the truth of whether or not we are free, whether or not we are morally responsible, of whether or not determinism is true. I've actually spoken to Drew on this point, I think on the thread of this video, when he posted it on Soteriology 101, and he didn't say anything in return. He tried to press me a little bit, but I kept coming back, and he just stopped replying. Because the point is, he's wrong. He keeps saying, like, oh, people just don't understand. You don't understand compatibilism, friend. There's many different varieties. Sure, if you want to attack soft determinism, that's fine. But no Calvinist needs to be wedded to the fact of soft determinism. They can be a simple compatibilist and just be kind of agnostic about whether or not they ought to argue for determinism, if that makes sense. That doesn't mean that they disagree with determinism. They just don't argue for it. They would rather argue for something a little bit more mild or modest, such as the thesis of compatibilism.
I mean,
that makes sense.
It does, and I agree with you. I mean, I'm fine with being a soft compatibilist. I and I'm okay with it. The thing that I would say with regard to this is what Drew does is he kind of makes this equivocation and this conflation between determinism and a kind of hard causalism, which Jimmy might actually be okay with, right? I mean, I think you, me, and Jimmy actually are three different types of compatibilists, which shows that Drew is painting with too broad of a brush. But what I would say is the fact that God has determined, I think, determined every single truth value in create. Yes, God has determined my bowel movements. They are determined. That does not mean that God is micromanaging or causing or bringing about or doing anything like that, right? Determining the truth value can entail determining it through the sufficient conditions of free choices to bring it about, right? That God can determine that X be true, but X could be true contingently upon other free choices, right? So it's what Drew is doing is he's basically saying, well, compatibilism is hard determinism.
which is deterministic incompatibilism. So what if we really want to get technical of what he's doing, he's shifting back and forth between deterministic incompatibilism and deterministic compatibilism, soft determinism, right? He's conflating those two things, and he's shifting back and forth depending on the context, because he doesn't understand the differences, because he just doesn't understand what he's talking about.
I want to. Yeah. This may not seem important, and maybe it's not that important, but I do think it's of at least a little significance. That it sounds to me like something of the motivation for bringing up God determining one to get on the toilet is because, from a libertarian perspective, that's not meaningful. But is it then being conceded that the Calvinist has the higher view of God's plan, since down to the finest detail, even when you go to make excrement, has some long-term significance down the road? Like, it seems to me like even the Calvinists can even say, even when you sneeze, even these tiny little body reactions that you barely even think about, you don't remember all the millions of times you've blinked in a given week, all of those things were meaningful. Those were things that God handpicked for his plan. You know, and again, we might have different views of the way in which God does that, the amount of detail down to which God does that. But nevertheless, it's possible minimally for a Calvinist to say God has determined those things and made them meaningful. I don't know. Is it just being conceded that that's not the case for a libertarian?
Are you saying that they have such a low view of God's power and omnipotence that they don't think he can use excrement for redemptive purposes?
Yeah, that's amazing.
Poop with purpose.
Seems very personal.
It's for a purpose.
I think Ezekiel would have a problem with
it. Dang.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh,
I'm not trying to make an emotional appeal or something like that, but it does seem to me to be a huge. I'm sorry, this sounds really silly or whatever, but it seems to me to be a huge comfort that no matter what I'm doing, even when I am sinning, I know that because God has planned for that sin and is in control of that sin, it will never have control over my life. I live in the comfort of the fact that all these terrible things that happen and that I even do myself, even when they terrify me and make me worry about the assurance of my salvation, it assures me to remember that even those things are paid for and God is in control of them. He's not being surprised by them in his plan. You know, so like much less excrement, like it just, I don't know how far that little joking comment seemed like a very small aside, but I don't know what kind of behind it.
But it's telling.
I love it.
I think Jimmy just went real personal, and that deserves like a Pine Creek video where he just plays me a lot and makes it look like Tyler relates to that. Thank you, Tyler, for remembering that.
I'll never forget.
Go ahead.
I said I'll never forget. Pine Creek helped me evangelize, so I'm okay with it.
Yeah. There was I had a question because I just thought of it. This isn't like some criticism. I don't want with full knowledge of how good it is. Let me bounce it off your head, Tyler. Earlier we had a discussion surrounding Isaiah 41, and to me there's an element to which this is kind of it's obviously polemical, right? Against Babylonian gods, right?
Right.
So my question is, say you, I don't know, take a Heiser view that they're kind of some spiritual beings of immense power, right?
Yeah.
Well, why couldn't they just do the things? So one of the things is this has to contrast God apart from them, but why can't they do some of the things God does do in an open theist scheme? like manipulate things to get their achieved ends, right? Why couldn't a being of like that magnitude, these lesser magnitudes, but not the big Yahweh one that is a super calculator, but lesser calculators, like the discount shelf elementary school ones. Why can't they just get some basic goals done and thus fulfill the things they're asking for?
Yeah, that's a good. I mean, I think that's a good point. They really could. They really could. I mean, this is like the person who attributes to the devil basically, omniscience, right? Because they hold a certain view of the activities of the devil that they could do that. I mean, here, why couldn't you have, why couldn't the devil, pass this test?
Yeah,
on the open theist view.
Yeah, it's so lowered, the bar.
Yeah.
That now there are tons of, say, exalted spiritual beings possibly that could fulfill such. And it's not really a test for Yahweh; it's a test for a freaking, is that a decent Zeus you're dealing with there?
Yeah, I mean, their Mega Zeus. The reason they have to lower the bar is because they want their Mega Zeus concept of God to pass, right? But the whole point of this is only Yahweh can do this, right? So they have to lower the bar because they have to, if they want their concept, their lowered concept of omniscience to be able to not clearly fail, which it does.
Yeah, I know what they're going to do. They're going to either change the magnitude of it, or they're going to be like, bet he can't do it twice. He
can't do it while standing on his hands from his Chris Fisher platform.
I remember, this is going to seem kind of off topic, but I can't think of another. This analogy just kind of randomly came to me. I remember listening to a sermon, I think it might have been by John Piper. I'm sorry, Tyler. About...
I'll let it pass.
No. You know what? It wasn't Piper. It was Eric Tonis from Vela. It was given a topic on Christian sexuality and how the question will often be asked by young people, how far can we go before it constitutes lust? And he made this sort of meta point that, don't you just think right off the bat that's the wrong question to ask? Like, don't you think it's just the wrong way to go? That if you even have to ask that question, something is wrong. Like, and it makes me think of the same kind of thing with this whole lowering the bar. Like, people will come up with views of God where they're like, well, God doesn't need to be impassible. He can just be, super... powerful in his emotions. God doesn't need to be a say. He can just be a necessary being. God doesn't need to be immutable. He just needs to be in control of all the things that are going on. God doesn't need to be the biggest, most majestic, glorified thing that I can have in my imagination. All I need to do is have it. Like, that just seems to me like the wrong way to even begin doing theology, to have this view where it's like, man, what's the minimal theological gravitas that I can come up with that suffices for this philosophical topic? Like, that's just that. Where does the Bible ever speak about God as if you can say, what are the minimal means necessary to get this topic done? That's just not the kind of language that's ever used anywhere in the scriptures about the magnificence of God. It seems to me like the question should be the other way around. Like, how can we get rid of all of these minimal ways of thinking about God and blow out our ceilings and roofs on how we already, even in Calvinism, tend to put God in boxes? Like, how can we make him higher? This is
right. I think that one of the responses that would possibly be given from the people that I know would be that this is not a intrinsic limit on God and his godhood in terms of his power. It's more of like a self-limiting aspect. So like, whereas he could do this he limits himself so as he doesn't.
Right. No one cuts off his legs. He does it himself.
Which is really odd, right?
Yeah, it's bizarre.
You know what's really bizarre? That Right Said Fred hasn't put out their second album yet. Dave,
bro,
just bizarre.
Listen, it's hard to be a fan of Right Said Fred in 2021. We're a very small group of individuals, but we're holding strong.
We're holding strong. Anyways.
No, I want to harp on that too, because like, oh my goodness, isn't like one of the beauties of the incarnation that when God chooses to take on the tenderness and vulnerability of a human nature, he doesn't lose any of his Godhead. He's just as much God when he's the Son incarnate, human, as when he's outside of creation. Like there's no.
Well, I hear a lot of these people argue for kenosis at the same time.
Yeah,
make these.
They do.
So it's not surprising to me that they even hyper limit the incarnation.
See, I did not know that.
Yeah, they usually fall within the. I mean, these folks might not. That's totally fine. But I usually find it that they're kin. They're brothers and sisters. The same argument. So.
Yeah, I've generally found that the same thing, that when they talk about these things, it's a very kenotic theology that goes along with it.
Okay, I can't comment on that, but I will just say that to me seems to be the root of the issue then, right? Like if you've got problems in your Christology, of course, your doctrine of salvation and the sovereignty of God is going to suffer. Your views of the Trinity and the incarnation come prior to those things.
Well, yeah, I think we've talked about this before. We pointed this out. I pointed this out in my debate with Will Duffy, and almost I found that almost to a person, when I talked to an open theist, they started pulling at one string somewhere. It's not always the same string. Sometimes it's omniscience, sometimes it's aseity, sometimes it's simplicity, sometimes it's impassibility. Whatever it is, they started pulling at a string somewhere, thinking that string is going to come out on its own. Right, but really they've just unraveled everything, right? So when you start pulling at you start pulling at timelessness, right? So you now have a time bound or a tensed being. Like pretty much every open theist, I think these guys even admit that they think that God is not timeless without time, because they deny pretty much everything that's about classical theism. But when you start asking them, well, does that mean God can change? And they say, because they want to say that God can change his mind, right? And you pointed out, and that's when I don't know exactly how they would answer it. But you have people like Will Duffy. They're going to come along and say, oh, well, the incarnation was a change, right? That proves that God can change, right? The instant you say that, I'm just saying, well, you've literally just denied the hypostatic union. Right? You cannot say that the incarnation changed God. Because the whole point of the incarnation was that the humanity of Jesus did not change the divine nature. It did not change God as God. So the instant you want to say that and use that as you've denied the incarnation. You've denied, you've denied aseity. You've denied immutability. You've denied simplicity. You've denied omnipotence. These are what people don't realize is that classical theism is a holistic concept. Right, it's not actually all these different ideas in a chart, right? You cannot get rid of one and not have the entire ball of wax come apart.
Yeah, I agree.
And I'll just say, because there are in some issues I think I would take dispute with classical theism, but here's the issue. Not such that I disagree with classical theists on these attributes or that they hold together essentially. You cannot pull any of these strings and not lose all of them, like you're saying. And I am willing to bet money that your opponents here, Tyler, don't understand that. I don't think that they comprehend the perfections of God aren't like these cool outfits that God wears every once in a while. Like they are his very nature. You can't try to pick them apart, cherry pick who God is, and make an idol on your own. Like that's. So I don't think you were going so fast there with the attributes, and here I am thinking like I don't think people have lost contact with the old arguments that classical theists would make. How look, if these things are interdependent, you take one of them away and the whole universe collapses. They just are who God is.
Neoplatonism. Sorry.
We should continue.
Yeah, my bad. I'll play it. Sorry, I was letting them talk. They don't shut their mouths. Frick.
God can say, I'm going to do something and then do it, is not compatibilism, no matter how many times that you said it is. I don't know what else to say to that.
They're completely different concepts. And then to say that this is how God works with his creation. So when Scripture reveals God operating dynamically, it's an anthropomorphism or what? It's unstated compatibilism.
Does God go from not working to starting to work with his creation? Then divine simplicity is false.
Does God recognize the beginning? In the beginning, does God recognize a beginning? Does God operate sequentially?
Right.
Not a true God, then they cannot declare the future as causally inferred from past events. So notice in 21 to 23 that it says, let them bring forth and declare to us what is going to take place. As for the former things, declare what they were, that we may consider them and know their outcome or announce to us what is coming. That is, tell us what happened in the past so that we can know what will happen in the future. If a future event can be known as causally inferred from the past by a true God, then libertarian free will cannot be true.
No, wait, what?
Let's look at his argument here because I want to unpack this. I'm going to cast. You can cast the scriptures up there again. I've got this in chapter. So his argument is from 21, right? So present your case, says the Lord Yahweh. Bring forth your strong reason, says the King of Jacob. Let them bring forth and show us what will happen. Let them show the former things what they were, that we may consider them and know the latter end of them, or declare to us the things to come. So what Tyler thinks this is saying is that there is a causal relationship between the past and the future, such that God can analyze the past and then predict with certainty all future outcomes and know the latter end of them, or declare to us the things to come. This, that we may consider them and know the latter end of them. I don't think this is saying if we consider the past, then we can know all future events, right? It's just saying consider the past so that we can know the end of the things that have come to pass, and show us the things that are to come hereafter, that we may know that you are God. So this sounds like fortune telling, right? Show us the things that are to come hereafter. Tell us about what's about to happen. But then just after, yes, do good or evil so that we may be dismayed and see it together. Indeed, you are nothing and your work is nothing. He who chooses you is abomination. And then he describes what he's going to do. I raised up one from the north and he shall come. This is not
a power claim. It's
a power claim. It's not a knowledge claim.
You do something. You can't. I can do something.
Exactly.
Power claim. It's about what God intends, and he will bring it to pass. And that these people, they're nowhere in that same category. They can't do this.
And one thing that you'll this might
just really quick, the power claim just is a knowledge claim. Declare it because you know it. If you're a true God, you should know it. So declare it to us. So they're setting up this power knowledge claim thing as if they're in like opposition to each other.
Yeah, does God just bat 10 out of 10 in his guesses or something?
I don't know. I don't get it.
It's also weird, like the way he characterized your position. Like God knows that, like you know, Colton ate an apple 26 years ago, so he knew he would come on this podcast because of that. Like that's not what you're saying.
No, and I also, it's also not my argument that this is what God does, right? I don't think that God has to, because again, I believe in omniscience. I don't think that God is an uber Zeus. So the fact that this is how they instantly conceive of it is telling about how they understand God, because the God of the Bible, the God of Orthodox Christianity, doesn't think, we don't think that God needs to look at something. He needs to look down the corridors of time. That's why that's a terrible cliche. He needs to look down the corridors of time to know what's going to happen. So, no, I don't think that God needs to look at the past and infer to know the future, right? That's the whole point. The gods that he's challenging can't even do that. That's the whole point. They can't, they don't know the future, they can't declare the future, and they can't even do it mechanistically in the same way that God does it perfectly as the author of all things. This is why when you get into 46, it says that God is the one who declares decrees, declares the ends from the beginnings, right? Because God is the one who's decreeing it. They can't even do it by inference what God does by decree. That's the whole point. They aren't God.
I think there's also an issue in their understanding here of libertarian freedom, because if on the one hand, if they want to say that human interactions are so mathematically related causally that an inference could be as if it's just perfectly known or knowable, then in what sense is the person free to do otherwise?
Yeah, it's just another inconsistency.
It seems like it's a wild guess, right?
Yeah, it would have to be.
I have no idea. If there's no relationship, well, then you get to maintain this like contra causality. But if there is a strong relationship between who you are and what you do, then you can have some sort of like inferential guess. So which is it?
Right.
It takes some time and stuff, but I did some study on this word. It's declare in Isaiah 46:10, and so you'll notice that and viewers, you can just like pause this and rewind it or whatever else and look this up later at your leisure. But there's all these times where it says in Isaiah 41 verse 22, tell us the future, and then in verse 23 it also says do something, and the word declare is in there again, and then verse 26 from the beginning here I'll just scroll up a little bit. Who has declared from the beginning that we may know? So he's declaring something to people so that they can know what he's about to do. This is not God yelling out into the void declaration of pre-creation in Isaiah 46. And then
him demonstrating his godhood to creatures. It's him demonstrating it. I'm telling you now what I'm going to accomplish so that when it comes to pass, you'll know. It's not him going, hold on, I'm going to get in my time machine. I'm going to go back and I'm going to look at the Great Depression. I'm going to study the stock market, and then I'm going to travel into the future until those circumstances are correct. It's not the DeLorean model.
And I would argue that, Tyler's going to go on to criticize our hermeneutic here, but he says that let them bring forth and show us what will happen. Let them show the former things what they were, that we may consider them and know the latter end of them, or declare to us the things to come. It seems to me, and I could be wrong, but it seems to me that what he's saying is that God is looking at the past and seeing what's happened and seeing the causal relationship of the past, and then inferring from that as to what will happen in the future. That we may consider them
comment as well, and that was.
But Tyler doesn't believe that, right?
No.
So he's not. He's wanting to take as straightforward as possible of a meaning out of this, but that's not what he believes is happening here.
That's very interesting.
That's all I have to say about that.
Right? If a God is not a true God, they cannot declare the future as they can the past. Here, they're going to come back and they're going to say, okay, but this isn't talking about any type of causal inference, right? Is God able to kind of read the tea leaves of what's happening? So one of my biggest objections against open theism is simply that it fails the test that God gives to us.
So one of the things that you'll see here is it says that he's including us in this test for the true God. On a video that says, is it even possible for Christians to affirm this? And then the test involves
plausible, I think was the word, but yeah
plausible. And then the test includes false prophets of Baal. And then later he'll refer to us as wolves. So it's to say that there is no animus or animosity or vitriol precipitating or laced with these comments is pretty interesting.
Well, I guess I would just say, to be fair, he's just trying to say that, listen, if we're looking at the scriptures and we're trying to determine who's the real God, then open theism and dynamic omniscience doesn't cut it. And he's expressing his convictions in that regard. And so, I think he's doing that as well as he can. But he is saying, and he can feel free to correct me on this, and I have reasonable reason. Can you say that? Reasonable reason to think that this is true. But he would not affirm that open theists and people who hold the dynamic omniscience are Christians. Yeah. And so that in that sense, it's not plausible for us to hold to because we're not Christians. We're not born again. We might be Christian in name, but not truly regenerated and Jesus following and all that. So because
if we were elect and received divine gnosis, we'd all be affirming classical theism.
And I mean, and it says chooses an abomination. So if we're
again, I mean the divine gnosis is a cheap shot to the really stupid idea that Calvinism is semi-Gnostic, which is just one of the dumbest dumbs that have ever dumb to dumb in the history of dumbery. But the statement that I wouldn't affirm that they're a Christian. I mean, I don't hide it. I will just flat out come on the record that it's not my job to say whether someone is saved or not. I don't claim to know whether they are saved or not. What I would say is that if I was in charge at church, I would bar them from the table and I would not include them in something like brotherly fellowship, right? But when you read something like 1 Corinthians, where people caught in sin, they are cast out to the devil, they're cast out of the congregation. It's an attempt to bring them back to repentance. It doesn't mean that they're not saved. Saying that someone is going to be treated not as a brother, they have an aberrant view, they're outside of the congregation, is not the statement that I therefore know that they are reprobate and damned to hell or something along those lines. But they are correct that I think that this is something that is a heretical position outside of the bounds of Christian orthodoxy, such that it is not a Christian position.
Mm-hmm.
So I hope that's about as clear and concise as I can say it.
Choosing a God that's not Yahweh, then we're being compared with the worshippers of Baal, right? And so that's his argument, and that's fine. He's welcome to believe that, but this is just our response to that.
How would you respond to an open theist who says, "Well, listen, Tyler, I'm taking scripture at face value, and it's you who has to do all these, jumping jacks and cartwheels to avoid what the text seems to be clearly saying"? How would you respond to something like that?
Yeah, I mean, at that point, I would say, okay, well, then exegete the passage. One of the principles that we use in hermeneutics is called the analogy of faith, or the rule of faith, and that is that we use the clear to interpret the less clear.
So are we saying that we're running to, and one of the things he says is often we'll use parables to, or people will use parables.
Well, that was a jab at somebody in particular, I think. But
but he'll say people will use parables that are unclear to interpret the clear. But I mean, we just went through Isaiah and showed.
Was that exegesis? I said, was that exegesis?
No, because
because proper exegesis doesn't mean I agree with you. You didn't do exegesis because I disagree with you. Is not. Yeah. Anyways.
All right.
After Abraham sacrifices, basically tries to sacrifice his son, Yahweh says, "For now I know."
Now I know. Yes.
You're God, right? And the open theist is going to go to that and they're going to say, "Oh, well, see, God learned something, right? He didn't know that before. Now he knows that Abraham fears God."
Right, implying that he didn't know before, so that's why he did the test.
Right.
So when we're talking about how Abraham says, "Now I know," in this segment,
you mean Yahweh says, "Now I know."
I'm sorry. Yeah, Yahweh. Sorry, man-centered.
It snuck out, Warren. It snuck out. You're so man-centered.
Freudian. But so one of the things that he'll note in here is how in Scripture God has had an entire lifetime so far in relation to Abraham's lifetime with him, to know him, to search his heart, to see him develop, to guide him, to nurture him, to give him truth and wisdom. And he's called him a righteous man. And so God knew that Abraham was a righteous man. And so Tyler will argue that this means that with a degree of certainty, meaning God knew Abraham did sacrifice. Well, no, that can't be true because he didn't. God knew that Abraham is sacrificing. Well, no, he knew that he was about to. It never actualized that he, offered his son in a series where he goes through. But God stops him and says, "Now I know that you fear me." It was an angel of the Lord. We can discuss whether that was a Christophany or not. But he basically says, "Now I know." Well, we would say that's just simply an epistemic shift in category of saying, I'm giving you a test because I believe you'll pass it. I'm giving you a test because I can't say I know because it hasn't actualized yet. So it's in the realm of possible in an epistemological sense. But as certain as I can be without it actually having occurred, I know. But when it manifests, I can declare, now I know, because we've made an epistemological shift from the realm of the possible with high probability to the certain. And so God now knows it as it is. He once knew it as it was, and now he knows it as it is. And so, I don't know, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I would say that. So Tyler's argument here is that God has declared Abraham righteous by his faith decades prior when he believed God when he said that he was going to give him Isaac. And so he's conflating, if you will, a statement of Abraham being righteous by faith and God fearing. He's saying he is righteous, therefore he fears him. He already knew this. He had done it for decades. But the issue is surrounding seeing Abraham's righteousness, his declared righteousness, imputed righteousness, if you will, work out. So in terms of whether he was willing to sacrifice Isaac or not. And so when he says, now I know that you fear me, such that you're willing to do this. Because what Tyler is assuming is that God can know us so intimately that he can know that we will do one thing. So, and I think that most traditional, traditional foreknowledge people that would hold to sequential reality or something like that might even say God knows us so intimately that he can predict with absolute certainty what we're going to do. But so his whole argument is predicated on God already knew that he was righteous decades ago. So why does he need to find this out now? But this is talking about a specific action that he was testing to see if Abraham, for instance, with us, we've been declared righteous. We have God's righteous spirit, with Christ's righteous spirit within us. Does that mean that when God brings certain things our way, that we will choose to obey him? Like that's not what Tyler believes about that, right? So then why would that be necessarily true about Abraham? So I think that responds to his point here with regards to him. And I don't know, he may not have even gotten into that bit yet. That might be his next segment. I'm getting confused, but anyways.
I'll pull it up.
It also doesn't say, that he now knows that Abraham would choose to sacrifice his son. It says, I now know that you fear God since you have not withheld your son. Okay, so
pause it for a second. How is that not specifically saying, now I know that you fear me because you've not withheld your son. You've not chosen to not follow through on this. How is that not saying the exact same thing that he negated? Can you rewind that again?
Yes.
When he said this, I was like,
now knows.
Right. Implying that he didn't know before. So that's why he needed the test.
Right. It also doesn't say that he now knows that Abraham would choose to sacrifice his son. It says, I now know that you fear God since you have not withheld your son. Okay, so it's not that God. So they're going to want to read it and say, okay, well, God didn't know that Abraham would actually go through with it, right? But notice, God isn't saying, now I know what your decision is going to be. It's now I know what your heart is.
Didn't he just argue that God knew his heart the whole time? But now
he's trying to say what he'll go on is here. Just play the next few seconds here.
It's now I know that you fear the Lord. Well, was that not the case in the heart of Abraham before the incident? So is it not the case that God didn't have present knowledge about Abraham's heart prior to the decision? So now you have, if you actually take their view, you have this problem where God now doesn't even have certain present.
Yeah, okay, I see what you're getting at there. So God would have, open theist says that God knows all present things. And, and that would include the state of every person's heart at the present moment. And so what you're saying is, based on their understanding, that would entail that God doesn't have present knowledge of their heart, because it says, now I know, that's interesting. Okay, all right, very good. I like that. I think that's clear.
There are other examples where, like in Kings.
Here, pause it for a second.
I don't have them.
So his point was to say that it's an attack on our hermeneutic, and it's saying, see, they're not reading this straightforward. They're going to tell you that they're reading it straightforward, but if God doesn't know that Abraham fears him, then he doesn't have present knowledge of how his heart is, and so they're not reading it straightforwardly. And what he doesn't do is provide an alternate explanation that does read this in the most straightforward way possible from his position. And maybe that's not what he sought out to do, right? He's just trying to refute our perspective. But the issue is that God knew that Abraham was a righteous man and that he feared God, but did he fear God enough such that he would obey him in this particular thing? That's what's in question. So Abraham's coming down with a knife. Abraham, stop. Now I know that you fear me because you're not willing to I don't understand why that's, yeah.
Why is that controversial?
I mean, it seems weird that I have to say that I don't think that the objection is that challenging to understand, right? It's an internal. They keep trying to be like, well, that's not Tyler's view. Of course, it's not my view, right? It's an internal critique, and I don't beg the question when I do internal critiques, like they do. So I'm trying to do an internal critique of their view and an internal critique of their hermeneutic, because what they're trying to say when they go to a passage like that is to show that God learned something new that he didn't know before. Even on Drew's really trying to wriggle out of this, that, well, and I could pull Leighton Flowers and be like, well, where's that in the text? Because nowhere does it say, well, he knew that he feared him enough in that instant about that event to therefore, like, none of that's in there. None of those qualifications are in there. But what it says is, I now know that you fear the Lord. Well, was it not the case that Abraham feared the Lord an hour before? Right? Did his disposition change towards the Lord such that he needed this test to find out what Abraham's heart, the condition of Abraham's heart, right? Notice that the condition of Abraham's heart, whether or not he feared the Lord, is the thing that is said it was found out, quote unquote, by the test. Right? Well, on their view, they're going to say, well, therefore that means God learned something new. Right? He actually learned something new. Right? The nuance is going to be that the Reformed person is going to read that as anthropomorphic language, right? We're going to read that as a type of analog, teaching us something in the same way that when God is in the garden and he says, Adam, where are you? And Adam, finally says, here I am. God doesn't learn suddenly where Adam is, even though he asked the question, where are you? Right? It's that it's educational. It's teaching us something. It's pedagogical, so to speak. It's going to teach us something. It's something that is showing us how God is sovereignly, working through creation, right? It reveals to Abraham what Abraham's own heart is. It wasn't that God needed to learn this new thing. That's going to be one of our views. The objection is, well, given open theism and the hermeneutic that they use in using passages like this to try to say that God learns, the fact is what God learns would have been a present or an even past reality. That's the whole point, right? The thing that's revealed by the test is something that already was the case, right? So if God learns it, it means that God learned something that already was the case, which means that God not only learned something in the future, he learned something about something that was already the case, right? I'm not sure the struggle that they're having with what even the point of the objection is. It doesn't mean they have to agree with it. Right. They can still respond, but I'm confused on how they're having trouble understanding what the point was.
Well, it just shows you how fluid they think like human characters are. Like, I mean, let's be frank here. Human beings sits on pins and needles. You know, Colton seems like a real nice guy, but he may also decapitate people in the next 5 minutes because it's hard to predict what our characters are going to be. And it's so difficult. God can't even know what your character is from minute to minute.
Right. He's relying on some sort of like causal interaction between Abraham's actions with Isaac, and then therefore that reveals something like what Tyler said was already the case. As if that's something that he learns that quality.
Well, think about it. Abraham has to go up a hill to do this, right? Like, hey, Abraham, are you serious about it at this point? Like, you can go so Righty's paradox on it, right? Every couple steps. Hey, are you serious now? You're gonna do it? You're gonna do it? I don't know. I'm just here for the ride, man. You know.
And why was it the moment that he raised the knife?
Oh yeah.
You know, like, why couldn't he have? Why not when the knife's in his chest?
Well, that proved it to me. I take it. Look, it's so dumb. Like, did he know his character before? Like, at the bottom of the hill, maybe contemplating it? I don't know. It seems like really weird. Like, God could only know in the moment of the choice whether he had such a character to do it. Like, no, you can figure it out. I know Tyler's character. Tyler, I know him so well. I know he would never eat a baby. Like, I'm not a prophet, but I don't have a special insight to his character. But I know something about him. I know he wouldn't eat a baby, right? So, I mean, I don't know. But we can't say that because maybe Tyler will libertarian free will and just start, Dahmer.
Well, notice, I could have found out that all my excrement was determined, and that could just drive me crazy. But like, think about what they said earlier. Like, are you saying that God isn't powerful enough to name a baby?
Yeah, oh my God.
Which really, I mean, that the cheeky way of saying, are you saying that God isn't powerful enough to be able to bring about and know that Cyrus will declare to bring back the Jews? I mean, think of all the free will decisions that God would have to actually know to bring that about. So I would go back and be like, are you saying that God isn't powerful enough to know the day before he had to give that? Let's be honest, that would have been psychologically traumatic for Isaac, right? I mean, if I took my kid up to the mountain, tied them up, brought up a knife, and I was about to kill them, I'm sorry, my kid's going to have dad issues after that. Are you saying that God didn't know the day before? God wasn't powerful enough to know the day before? Right? I mean, just think of the inconsistency that's needed for them to say God's powerful enough to know and make this prophecy and bring it about, the future event and all the heart condition and the willingness of Cyrus to be softened to the Jews and to allow them to return and make this proclamation and all that kind of stuff. But he can't know of the ostensibly at the time, the most righteous man who was closest to God, who received the covenant promises. He didn't know the day before that he feared God. Right? I mean, just think of the level of inconsistency that has to be within the system.
Or pure insanity. Oh my goodness! Like to me, it's just like I'm not gonna reiterate my objection. It's just, yeah, it's nuts. It's just hard to believe, and it's just you lose what you've been trying to argue for. Like, oh no, we have omniscience. He knows everything in the past. No, you don't. No, you have this clear. I agree with you. It's so simple. It's on the face of it, right? And I don't know. I'll shut up now.
Now, how's that not the straightforward reading of the passage?
Jordan says he did a decent job of explaining what the.
Yeah. So let's reject open theism because of this. Yeah. Okay. Then what does that mean? God is, and what he would probably say is that God is speaking from our perspective. He's condescending to our perspective, so that we, can learn something from the story or whatever else. But, anyways, carry on. I got about 30 more minutes in me.
I thought I pulled it up, but sorry. Anyways, I'll keep looking for it. But where in 2 Kings, it's 2 Kings, where it talks about how God relents.
Sure.
Right? And they're going to say, see, God changes his mind. Right? The problem is that in the exact same chapter, we're told that God is not a man that he should change his mind, relent, exact same Hebrew term,
right,
or lie. Right? So it says, because God's not a man like us, he can't do these two things. Right? He can't change his mind. He can't change his mind, and he can't lie. Right? Well, the open theist wants to say, well, God can change his mind, but he can't lie.
Okay.
Right? And it's like, okay, but God just said he can't. The prophet just said he can't do either of those things.
So he says he's not a man that he should change his mind. That the context is, I'm not like you that I would have the same motives or intentions or the same fickleness. He did rightly note that God did say, I changed my mind, but God's saying I didn't change my mind like you would. And all throughout Scripture, we see where God changes his mind. He will repent, he'll change his mind. He will issue a decree, and people will repent, and so he will relent because he is a living and interactive God.
And this is the strange thing to me about this statement. I'm just going to share my tab up here again so that we can look.
I love how he's like, so the way out is, well, he just doesn't change his mind like we change our minds. Okay, so he can lie. He just doesn't lie like we lie. Right? Like, I mean, the gymnastics that have to be gone through to do this. I mean, the passage flat out says, I am not a man that I should change my mind or lie.
Yeah, like what does change my mind mean? Like, other than like think differently or something like that. Well, then if he doesn't change his mind like we change our mind, well, the way we change our mind is we just think differently, right?
Yep.
How far are we? Like, even if we take it their weird convoluted route, I mean, then you still get rid of the sequential thinking nonsense, and then you have to explain God's thinking in some way utterly different than human beings.
Yeah, you have to, and you have to remember. I mean, this is a two sides of the same coin. I don't do either of I'm not a man that I do either of these things, right? Well, they want to say, well, no, he actually does one of those things. Well, the whole point was he doesn't do either of them in the same way because he's not a human. So if he does one of them, but just in a different way, then he can do the other one, but just in a different way.
Right. Well, that's their motive, is to try to change the change my mind thing into something like not change my mind, but like, change my mind like a man. So they can still affirm that he doesn't do either of those, but yeah, he changes his mind. So
I by the way, I got maybe like 5 more minutes in me.
No problem.
Look at the text.
All right.
You'll have to cast me up there. I can't. There you go. So it's this one. So now the word of the Lord, Yahweh, came to Samuel saying, I greatly regret, this is the repent word, that I have set up Saul as king, for he has turned back from following me and has not performed my commandments. And it grieved Samuel, and he cried out to the Lord all night. So when Samuel rose early in the morning to meet Saul, it was told Saul went to Carmel, and indeed he set up a monument for himself. He's gone around, passed by. And so if we come down here, Samuel is rebuking Saul for setting up this offering. Has the Lord as great delight in burnt offerings and sacrifices as in obeying the voice of the Lord? Behold, to obey is better than sacrifice, and to heed than the fat of rams. And then Saul, ostensibly, I have sinned, and I transgressed the commandment of the Lord and your words, because I fear the people and obey their voice. Now, therefore, please pardon my sin and return with me, that I may worship the Lord. But then Samuel said to Saul, I will not return with you, for you have rejected the word of the Lord, and the Lord has rejected you from being king over Israel. And as Samuel turned around to go away, Saul seized the edge of his robe and it tore. So Samuel said to him, the Lord has torn the kingdom of Israel today and has given it to a neighbor of yours who is better than you. And also the strength of Israel will not lie or relent, for he is not a man that he should relent. So what's happened is God has changed his mind about setting up Saul as king, and then Saul is begging with him, please go with me, don't leave me. And then Saul's just saying, God's made up his mind. He's not going to say, I'm removing this kingdom from you, and then just change his mind like a fickle man. That's it. It's set up. I'm going to find someone else. That's what he's saying. And so Tyler seems to me here to be putting the text in tension with himself instead of seeking to explain it in context, because God himself, in his own words here, says, I regret. And then down here, Samuel was speaking in a specific context to a particular person, not making a metaphysical claim about all of reality, about how God operates in each and every circumstance.
You mean when the prophet of God speaks to a king, that doesn't have direct application to the very nature of God and all of mankind?
No, it doesn't.
Oh man.
Do you have that meme?
All wrong.
Do you have that meme? Do you have that meme in the show notes or in the?
I pull it up real quick. Yes, sir. Let me pull it up here. Let's see.
You should play the video while you're searching for play the rest of his.
I mean, they can have memes all they want, but notice what they're mocking. I mean, if you think about what they're laughing at and what they're mocking, is they're saying, wait, you're saying a prophecy about God doesn't have impact about the nature of God? I don't remember exactly what the nature of God and the impact for humanity. And they laugh like, well, no, it doesn't. Well, no, it does. It flat out does. When a prophet comes and says God is like this, or God is not like this, it absolutely does have meaning for what God is like or not like, right? The fact that they're mocking it, I mean, it shows the level of just really disregard they have for the biblical text.
I noticed the emphasis on the fickleness, right?
Yeah.
Not the kind of sort of event of changing one's mind, but rather the fickleness of it, right? Oh, God just doesn't willy-nilly just change his mind.
Right. So I mean, what that does is, I mean, really what that could be is, well, God could decide that in Christ he actually doesn't love us anymore, but it's not a fickle decision, right? He really, really struggled with it. He really wasn't happy about it, but at the end of the day, for his purposes, he doesn't love us in Christ anymore, right? As long as it's not fickle, it's okay. It's just nonsense.
Yeah. And oh man, I love how this statement doesn't have metaphysical import for God, but all the statements that he prefers, they definitely do, and you can trust him on that because he has a wonderful plan for your hermeneutic.
Definitely.
So I'm gonna play the rest of it.
Oh yeah, thank you. That's a good point.
Because he's not a man like us. So what's happening in the narrative, when it appears that God is changing his mind, it's not that he's actually, like, God's like, oh, I learned something new, now I'm going to change my mind and do something else. It's it's dealing with these anthropomorphic language where it appears from our perspective that kind of a shift has happened in...
Perhaps an epistemic shift?
No. Or dynamic. Dynamic means changing, doesn't it? Is a shift a change? But it's from our perspective, so it's not a real shift. It's just from our perspective. Tyler?
Now they're just being dishonest, right? I flat out say, it's from our perspective that there's an apparent shift in providence, right? That it appears that God is doing one thing, but there's a change in what's happening, right? That's not a change or an epistemic shift, right? It's very easy to think, I could, not that God is trying to trick us, so this analogy isn't perfect, but I could be wanting to surprise my kids and take them to Disneyland, but I'm going to start by making it seem like I'm taking them to the dentist, right? Even though I know I'm going to take them to Disneyland, I'm planning on taking them to Disneyland. I've already paid for the tickets to Disneyland. We're going to Disneyland. I'm going to make it seem like that there's a shift in the plan, right? There's a dispositional change that happens in the providential outworking of the plan, right? And so there's a change, there's a shift. But no, that does not get you that there's an epistemic shift.
Right, it's like to curb their behavior. It's like it's a moral building thing sometimes, like that.
Right.
I'm going to pull this up real quickly here. Sorry. 1 second.
Yeah, it's interesting. His argument here what is his argument? This is one of the weakest points that he made, because he's saying God appears to change his mind, but he doesn't because Samuel says that he doesn't. But it's from our perspective. So here's a meme. Here are all of the passages that talk about God repenting or changing his mind. Here are the two passages in all of Scripture. You've seen the context of one there, which is 1 Samuel 15:29, and Numbers 23 through 19, verse 19. Do you know who said that, Warren? Do you know who said the passage there, that God is not a man that he should lie or repent? Bible trivia.
I know.
He's a false prophet.
Yeah,
it's Balak or Balaam?
Balaam, I believe.
Balaam, yeah. Balak is the king, and so and in that context.
But notice also anyone who reads it, the whole point of the Balaam prophecy is that he prophesies better than he knows. That's kind of the point. So they just, again, they're just mishandling everything and misrepresenting all these passages. And they look through, and this is the whole point of the hermeneutic, right? We don't do hermeneutics by counting up passages like this, right? Those are not, by the way, the only two passages that say that God would not repent, right? There are all kinds of other passages, like in James, where it talks about how God's not a shifting shadow, that he would change, right? There's all kinds of those are the ones that say God would not repent expressly in those terms. But we don't do hermeneutics by straw count like that. Again, it's they're using a meme because their hermeneutics is kind of this meme level of understanding. It's the same way that they have a meme level understanding of compatibilism and determinism.
Yeah. Gents, I'm sorry to say I have to go.
I gotta have too.
Really pregnant, so I have to take the time to take care of her. But I'll peace out. If you guys finish or something, just let me know when it's done and published and everything.
Colton, thank you for stopping by, and we appreciate your commentary.
Yeah. God bless.
God bless.
God bless you.
Tyler, I completely agree with your point. My goodness, this was one of my big disagreements with Chris Fisher over good old numbers here, Numbers 23. Because I basically said this is sort of like almost like a sort of strange genetic fallacy, right? You don't show what he's saying is false from the passage. Actually, the passage seems to imply what he's saying is actually true, right? As you mentioned. So instead of actually reading in context, what you've done is just like, well, he was he's a scumbag. I don't like, he's a false prophet. I can't ever say anything true. Well,
Yeah. The funny thing is, if you read and it flat out says it. So he puts 23:19. Oh, who said it? The false prophet. So it must be. No, notice the inference. It must be false then, right? But just read the passage, right? Balaam said to Balak, "Stay here beside your offering while I meet with him over there." The Lord met with Balaam and put a word in his mouth and said, "Go back to Balak and give him this word." So he went to him and found him standing beside the offering with the Moabite officials. Balak asked him, "What did the Lord say?" Then he spoke, "Arise, Balak, and listen. Hear me, son of Zippor. God is not human that he should lie. He is not a human being that he should change his mind." Right? We're expressly told in the passage that Balaam, in speaking to Balak, tells him the direct word of God that God had placed in his mouth. Yeah, so it tells you the type of hermeneutic. So when they're like, oh, well, context kills Calvinism, this is how they handle context. Well, this is a prime example. They just don't.
Well, Tyler, is the word of the Lord really a good source on Yahweh? You ever consider that?
I've never thought about it.
Yeah.
But I am a man, so I can change my mind.
So there is, I think that's really going to be the end of all the arguments for this video. I think. I don't know what you're thinking here. I think we're going to call it a night, Tyler, and I really appreciate you coming on too, just like Colton. It was great to have you on because, believe it or not, I feel like they had you had a target on you for this video. So
yeah, but I mean, they responded to me, but it's fine. But again, I mean, my entire point in here and in some of my other interactions with Warren and Provisionist Perspective is like it's really just when it comes to hermeneutics and theology and philosophy, and all, it's really just kind of bottom of the barrel stuff, right? So, I mean, we saw that they get terms wrong. They don't understand concepts. They don't understand basics. When they talk about context, they just ignore it. When the level of interaction is really just poor. And so when people are exploring open theism, I think they really need to see that it's supported by some of the poorest hermeneutics, by some of the most, and I don't mean to sound mean, but some of the most ignorant ways of handling philosophy and theology and history. I mean, we saw the comment about, Gnostic knowledge, the secret knowledge, like, that shows just a terrible understanding of history. We know that's just a false revisionist myth. I mean, it's just everything about it on almost every single topic they touch on. It's fitting that it ends with the meme, because everything that they talk about seems like it's just kind of drawn from a meme. It's not really, informed or robust in any way.
You could tell me if I'm wrong, and I could be, because I've never looked into this, but does God's openness in terms of his knowledge extend to his internal characteristics? Like, did God have to learn about himself in well, I don't know if they have like a tensed version. I'm assuming they're timeless.
No. Not timeless. They deny that God is timeless.
Oh, okay. So then, yeah, there was a time then where God had to learn about his own attributes, right?
I think that's an interesting question. I mean, at the very least, you could ask, did God have to learn about what he would do in response?
Or yeah, like this. It's funny that you said it was Neoplatonic earlier, Bonson, because that seems like there are a bunch of categories in terms of God's moral and ethical decisions that even he himself is subject to within his responses.
Yeah, well, yeah, it really feels that way, because especially like they talk about, we
Can
have
I keep wrong? I mean, they might argue for something different, but that's what it seems like to me. I don't know.
No, I relate to you there, Dave, because they talk about a living God. Well, what kind of life are we talking about? God's life is developing. He's coming to know himself a lot better over time, even on their own view. I mean, he has to see how it will be in the future. So
yeah, I mean that's kind of terrifying, right? This all-powerful being who created the universe. He's still considering his own moral and ethical dilemmas in how he deals with.
What they want to say, what they want to say though, is that he's like has these essential attributes and they're really nice and they don't develop, but there's no grounding for that. It's just an arbitrary, like, these things don't change about him.
Okay, so they would say that maybe his goodness is one of these things.
Yeah.
But they would have to concede that at one point there was a time when God had to learn, develop, or even express this goodness, right?
They might say that he's always known it, like he's always has some self-awareness of his essential character.
Okay.
I'm not sure that they could consistently do that, because we could easily point out that there's all kinds of situations that arise in free choices where there is no good option.
Precisely. I mean, how in the world could you be a judge of human beings in terms of their actions if you're still trying to figure that out, right?
Yeah. That's why I say that their concept of God is just like a really big Zeus. All right. Mecha Zeus.
And this is going to be the end of the recording. Thank you for listening. Tyler, we see you on the Free Thinker podcast. You got to stop by more, but in terms of this is over.